Write an equation in slope-intercept form for a line perpendicular to the graph of y equals negative 1/3 x that passes through the x-intercept of that line. So it's really the same stuff we've done, but there's like a different set of clues that are hidden. And so for this one I'll sketch something, and you can sketch this as well. So here's a graph. And by this point, maybe it's kind of clear that here's the y-intercept at 2, and it goes down 1 over 3. So we'll sketch this graph. Now what we need to do is we need to come up with a line that is perpendicular to this. So I'll show this dashed in red, so don't write this yet. So it would have to be perpendicular, but it would also have to pass through the x-intercept of that line. So somewhere over here, we have an x-intercept, because that's where it's going to run into the x-axis. So now we will sketch our line that would be perpendicular right there. Well, to make this work out, that means we're going to have to figure out the missing pieces. So we need to know what the new line's slope is. So the first line has a slope of negative 1/3, which means that the new line is going to have to be positive 3. And I didn't bother writing 3 over 1. So we've talked about opposite reciprocals a little bit by this point, so I'm not going to go deep in explaining that I just flipped it and made it opposite. But what I know is that the x-intercept of this line is also going to be the x-intercept of the new line, and that's where we have a value of 0 for the y-coordinate. So we need to know what this guy is. And because I'm going to consider this side work, I'm going to rewrite the original equation, and then where we see the value of y, we're going to substitute a 0 and write negative 1/3 x plus 2. And as I go through and I solve this, I'll subtract 2 from both sides, which gives me negative 1/3 x equals negative 2. And then I will multiply that by a negative 3. And I'm a little bit tight on room, so I'll write x is equal to positive 6. Quick little check. Sneak that back in 6. 1/3 of 6 is 2, make it negative, and negative 2 plus 2 does give me 0 over here. So we found the x value, which also means that we know this would be 6, 0. So for our new line, we want to be able to be like, well, it's got to be y equals mx plus b, because that's slope-intercept form. We wouldn't know the y-intercept for this new line, but I would know a point that it goes through, and I would also know the slope of this line. And since I think it's most clear to talk about slope, here's 3 times. Well, we're not going to be able to figure out the y-intercept just yet, so I'll put plus b. But we know that x is 6 and y is 0, so I'm going to put a 6 here and a 0 there, which means that 0 is going to be 18 plus b. I don't see the need to solve for this, so I'll write negative 18. b is negative 18. So as we put this back into this new line, that means that y is going to be 3x plus a negative 18, so I'll just write minus 18. So when I say, like, well, sneaky tricks, hopefully it's kind of starting to make more sense. You kind of have to figure out what are the puzzle pieces you have and how are you going to put them together. Write an equation in slope-intercept form for a line perpendicular to the graph of that passes through the y-intercept of that line. So again, different clues. So over here, I won't bother drawing the graph like I did last time, but we have our old line. Well, we know the old line has a slope of mystery. So the challenge is, we got to figure out the slope of this line. So the old line, 3x plus 2y equals 8. It's hard to tell what the slope is when it's in standard form. So we'll solve this for y. And the reason we'd get y by itself is, again, the reason we would get y by itself is that would help us see what the slope is. So the slope's going to be negative 3/2 for the original line. So that's the old line. That means that m1 equals negative 3/2, and the slope of the new guy is going to be the flip of that and the opposite. So there's our new slope. But it also has to pass through the y-intercept of this line, which means that's where x is 0. Now because it's in standard form, here originally, and that's usually easier to work with, I'm going to choose that rather than this. Actually, never mind, they're both equally easily done. Well, let's look at it both ways. And you might not even need to show work for this. This means that x is 0, so this term would go away. And 2 times what gives me 8? Well, that means that the y-intercept for the first line would have to be 4. I could also have plugged in 0 down here. 0 times negative 3/2 goes away, add on 4, you get 4. And we could go through the whole repeated process of solving it all over again, but since it goes through the y-intercept, we know they would share the same y-intercept. So I would write 2/3 x, because we figured out the new slope, and I would add on 4. So before we jump to what the assignment is, it's like the same stuff, different wording, a little bit of tricks happening, and probably more steps as well. So as you go through those more complicated problems towards the end of the section, be sure to be breaking it apart, mapping it, being as clear as possible, and showing your work.